Ann Bartlett. Ann. I love history. It reminds us how far we've come, and it empowers us to persevere. Tonight, I invite you to look back at the history of JDRF through my eyes. My family's journey with diabetes started when I was diagnosed Easter weekend, 1970. When he heard the news, my father was inconsolable. He was a pilot for TWA, and to help turn his grief into action, my mother suggested that he use his international travels to advocate for diabetes research. Through some friends, he soon met a woman who had started a grassroots project concerning research and needed some help launching the idea internationally. My parents held a dinner at her house, and among the guests was a gentle, soft-spoken, red-headed woman. She chatted with me for a while, and eventually she said, "You know, your dad and I are working to find a cure for diabetes, so you won't have to give yourself shots anymore." She knew all about boiling needles and glass syringes and using urine tests to determine blood sugar levels because, like my dad, she had a child with diabetes too. That woman's name was Lee Ducat, and her grassroots project was founded Juvenile Diabetes Foundation, now called JDRF. With Lee's support and connections, my father learned about the disease. He began to look for the best research overseas, talking to doctors and bringing them into contact with JDF. Dad befriended Dr. Bob Tattersall from England, who would become my father's resource for finding the most promising researchers on the globe. Dr. Tattersall shared his knowledge with my father, and eventually that relationship changed all of our lives in this room. Later, in 1979, my dad became the director of a camp for children with diabetes, and Dad met a boy from Philadelphia, Jimmy Plords, who was having trouble managing his diabetes. Jimmy had been making weekly trips to the ER, and many times with severe high blood sugars called DKA, and often unconscious. My father knew that doctors in England were using a new technology that might help Jimmy control his blood sugar levels better. So he called Dr. Tattersall in London, who told him that it was true. Doctors all across England were using a new technology that tested blood instead of urine. And the data was clear: much better control. By using blood, it gave immediate real-time information versus urine, which could give results as much as 6 hours old. The device had been available to the British public, and it was getting rave reviews. This new invention was called a glucometer, a blood glucose meter, and I bet there isn't a person in this room who hasn't seen one, used one, or searched for strips in the middle of the night for one. While people living with diabetes in Britain were experiencing one of the great transformations in diabetes care, here in the United States, you can guess how the FDA was responding to this new technology. The FDA was crippled with inaction. The FDA bureaucrats doubted the benefit of such a device. American pharmaceutical companies were interested, but because of the FDA's lack of approval, they were in no rush, and so the technology was simply not available in the US. To my father, the idea of waiting for the bureaucracy was not an option as long as there was a child in need. Soon enough, with the blessing and enthusiasm of Lee and Jimmy's doctor in Philadelphia, my father and I boarded a plane to London to go and pick up a meter and bring it home. In London, we stayed for a couple of days meeting with Dr. Tattersall to learn how to use it. My poor dad, every time he suggested I try it, I flew out of the room. My diabetes was in excellent control, and I was at an age where parental suggestions were met with total resistance. Eventually, though, he had enough blood testing supplies and a good understanding of how to use the device, and we headed for the airport. The trick was to get it back into the US without it getting confiscated in customs. So Dad put on his TWA uniform, hat, and overcoat, and we glided through customs with the contraband nestled safely in his flight bag. Our friend Jimmy was able to use the glucometer right away, and the data gained from Jimmy's case came to be very important. With the meter, Jimmy's weekly ER trips disappeared, and his health and ability to stay in school dramatically improved. Word spread, and soon enough, a vast network of JDRF parents put pressure on the FDA to make the blood glucose meter available in this country. The FDA agreed, and the pharmaceuticals stepped up to the plate. Now you can buy a glucometer in every drugstore in the US without a prescription. Most people with diabetes use their meters 6 to 8 times a day, and I can't imagine my life without it. Approving the technology in the US was a historic step for people with diabetes. The next step in our journey to cure diabetes is the development and approval process for the artificial pancreas. The artificial pancreas is like an insulin pump and a continuous glucose monitor working together. In other words, it's a mechanical way for a body to monitor its insulin needs. The artificial pancreas would drastically decrease the chance of complications, and more importantly, it will keep people with diabetes far healthier until the day we have a cure. If you think about it, the artificial pancreas of 2008 is equivalent to what the glucometer was in 1979. The next giant step in our journey to improving the lives of people with diabetes. A researcher recently visited our chapter, and one of his key points was the greatest obstacle his company faces in producing a cure is getting FDA approval. When I hear him say that, I am so glad to know that JDRF not only funds research, but fights for it as well. Since all our research has a similar hurdle, FDA approval, we would do well to remember our history. Just as the blood glucose meter offered better control with fewer complications, the artificial pancreas represents the next step in freedom. With the artificial pancreas, those of us with diabetes will have less on our plate to contend with, but most especially, it will help young people struggling with the disease. And when scientists deliver the cure, we'll all be healthy enough to receive it because of the artificial pancreas. I've had the disease for 38 years. It started as my parents' journey has become my own. What began with one woman has become a movement of millions. We speak from experience, we want a cure, and we can tell you this. At the JDRF, we've won these battles before, and we will certainly win them again. I would like to close by asking Senator Richard Schweiker to stand up. Schweiker an enormous debt of gratitude because he was responsible for getting us our first federal funding in the early days of JDRF. One of the great ironies of his life is that Senator Schweiker, without any personal connection, embraced this battle on his own in the 70s. His work to better our lives proved to be invaluable to his own family, as his granddaughter Ellie was diagnosed with type 1. Senator, thank you. I began by talking to you about history and my family's journey with JDRF. We have been a small part of an incredible journey to find a cure. Each one of you plays a part in that journey. Together we can become the first organization in the history of the human race to cure a chronic disease. My hope is that our journey is nearing its end, and for the sake of all of us who have type 1, please give generously and help us complete that journey. Thank you.